Welcome to the ISM Rochester Lunch and Learn webinar series. Our program for today will be Driving Change in Risk Management. Please be sure to participate and put any of your comments or questions in the chat box for our speakers. Today's program will be featuring two speakers, Caldwell Hart, who is also a CPSM and a CPSD, and Geoff Goodman, and they're from the company called Avetta. At this time, I'm going to be turning the program over to both Caldwell and to Geoff.
Thanks, Kathy. Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon. Hope you're having a what hopefully feels like wherever you are in upstate New York, more of a spring day. I spent quite a bit of time in Olean, so I know in the southern tier. So spring was always a welcome time of year when it finally started to turn warmer and the green started to come back. We're going to be talking about risk management today. And really the focus is evolving from what's been traditionally a monitoring-based risk management process that most organizations have followed to a slightly different and evolved view of risk management so you can drive better results. And change management's a big part of that. We're going to briefly introduce ourselves. I'm going to talk about the evolution of risk management, I said, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Geoff, to talk about the importance of change management in any of these kinds of initiatives. A little bit about me. My name is Caldwell Hart. As Kathy said, I'm a CPSM and a CPSD. Prior to coming to Avetta and coming over to the advisory sort of consulting world, I spent 25 years in industry. I was in aerospace and pharma and heavy industrial manufacturing and distribution. And I served 6 years as a chief procurement officer and a global head of supply chain. A big focus on transforming the organization's people, process, and how to apply enabling technology, and of course, cost, value engineering, risk, and sustainability. Also currently an ISM instructor and speak at conferences regularly. And I'll let Geoff introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. Geoff Goodman. I'm a principal solution delivery and change management at Avetta. I have over 25 years of experience working across industry and across functions, implementing technology and change initiatives, digital transformations, supply chain transformations, and the like. And I'm happy to be here. Glad to meet everyone.
Thanks, Geoff. For those of you who don't know Avetta, we are in the supplier risk management compliance technology space as a SaaS solution, both software and then the service piece. Geoff and I actually come out of our professional services advisory team where we work with clients to help them get the full value ROI of where our technology enables key processes. Our platform helps gather information on a range of topics from health and safety with contractors and suppliers, ESG and sustainability, and then also identifying and monitoring business risk so that you can make the most informed decisions and leverage information to enable your supplier processes, your procurement processes, and your supply chain processes. So I always like to start off with a quote, and I love this one for supply chain procurement professionals, that failing to prepare is preparing to fail. I think this was drilled into me early in my career as we would engage with suppliers and supplier relationship management and supplier development or preparing for a negotiation. You have to be prepared. And I think in the world of risk management, preparation is one of the key components. I like to start with setting the stage. These should not be, I think, new to anybody, as I think cost optimization, risk, and now the buzzword resiliency, sustainability, the application of enabling technology, which right now in most conferences is all about AI. Not long ago, it was about blockchain. Before that, it was big data. And before that, it was many other applications. But it's about enabling technology. And I say enabling because it's a process enablement. Strategic alignment, how the organizations are aligned to each other, aligned to corporate goals and objectives, aligned to finance, aligned to operations, and then overall value creation, which ties with cost, but it's not always just about reducing price or reducing the total cost of ownership. It can be about finding those right suppliers who have shorter lead times, higher technical capabilities, and a range of other things. I think I've been in the game long enough now to say I think these themes have been pretty consistent over the past 20 years in terms of setting the stage of what professionals like us are trying to address. I think what's changed now are some of the sub details, the strategies and the methods continue to evolve in order to address these things. Not long ago, what we used to do in these areas were Excel spreadsheets. And while we still use some Excel spreadsheets, now we've got technology and tools and other things that help us do things. And then each of these no longer sits in an island. We're looking at these holistically and how each of these elements work interactively. So moving on to risk management, I like to discuss briefly the terminology because I think there's subtle differences to it. And I think one of the risks today is many organizations are using the term supplier risk management, third-party risk management, and supply chain risk management almost interchangeably. And while they're certainly related, there's subtle differences between them. And so as you look at your processes, as you look at the technology you may use to supplement and enable those risk management processes, and where your procurement-based or supply chain-based risk management falls underneath the umbrella of your organization's overall enterprise risk management, I think it's important to make sure that you've got clear definitions of what the terminology means, because you might be using one term, but the process and the technology that you're selecting may not align to it. For example, if what you're doing is mostly monitoring individual suppliers, that's certainly a foundational and great thing to do, but that may not give you overall visibility to each tier of your supply chain and provide you real supply chain risk management. So as I've worked with organizations my own as a CPO and now in the advisory role, I like to make sure and encourage folks as they evolve their process to make sure that you're clear on your definitions. Building on that, these two terms have sort of also become sort of interchangeable. People will talk about strategic risk management, and then the next breath they'll talk about how they're resilient. They're slightly different. In the CPSM materials, we teach it, and I teach the course for ISM. We've traditionally said strategic risk management is about identifying, analyzing, and mitigating. It's about setting risk tolerance and risk profiles. And the primary focus is on management and containment with a lot of monitoring and early warning. But resilience is something more. Just because you do those things may not mean you have resiliency amongst your suppliers or in your supply chain. So resilience is bigger. It's really about digging in and understanding and how to adapt in the face of adversity through change in behavior and action. It's about focusing on solutions, identifying what's in your control, and again, taking action. While monitoring and mitigation has an element of action to it, it can be somewhat passive. And in some cases, organizations can become somewhat complacent in those actions. That's why I think resiliency is a next step above. So two approaches, which I've just alluded to. Again, monitoring, early warning, the traditional. These are like radars. You're looking at different kinds of risk, maybe looking at a range of factors, sort of setting red, yellow, green, plotting it on a chart. I think that's still a good foundation. But really thinking about resiliency is about identifying and enhancing the design of your supply chain, your supplier selection. I like to use the analogy to an engineer. The picture is a bridge. Engineers will plan the bridge. They'll look at all kinds of tests and historical performance of materials and various designs. They'll look for points of failure, and they'll try to come up with a design that sustains ongoing performance. But a real key piece of this is they look for the context and the purpose of where the bridge is going to be used. Is it a footbridge over a stream? Well, that's a different set of materials. But if it's intended to be able to have cargo, and it's over a deep ravine in an earthquake zone or something like that, then what might be a very simple stone bridge might be perfectly adequate for getting from point A to point B, but not adequate for the application that's going to be a part of. And so they look at all those things, pick the right material, the right design features, put it all together. So again, they can have sustained ongoing performance. That's what I think of today when I talk about us evolving our efforts to really get to resiliency in our supply chain risk management practices. And why? Because we've learned, risk is everywhere. Many people talk about COVID being the real first crisis that we've dealt with, but those of us, as I said, I've been in this game almost 25 years. It's been more than 2 decades of various events happening around the world, whether those be whether that be labor in our ports, whether that be natural disaster events like hurricanes and typhoons and volcanoes, all of those kinds of things. This is a little bit of a map over the last 10 years or more, going back to 2009. So you can see there's a lot of dates on there that just don't date to when everything hit the news in 2020 with COVID, which everyone who's outside of our function thinks that was when all these challenges erupted. No, it's been going on, and we've been focused on this as a professional group for many, many years. But what we've learned in all of this is it's never one of these events happening, and it's not an if, it's a when. And what we've learned is it's multiple factors pose risk to business. It's difficult to pick just one because they don't act as siloed events. You have a natural disaster. You need to shift a shipment or change a supplier. Is that easy to do? Well, if you've got multiple capable sources, maybe. But if you're in a highly regulated industry or you've become sole source, your risk associated with a natural disaster might be exacerbated by there's not enough labor capacity somewhere else. There may not be enough raw materials staged to move to another facility. May not be enough infrastructure in terms of electricity and other things in another part of a geography that you want to shift to. You may have additional risk in things like cyber and electronics or currency, economic cycle, inflation, geopolitical. All of these are risk factors that we in our roles have to be looking at, not as singular individual siloed items to address with mitigation plans based on one, but how do they work together? And then you've got the tier N challenge, which many of us have faced in our roles. So you're the company in the center. Many of us in our supplier relationship management and our supplier performance, and rightfully so, have focused primarily on tier 1. But tier 1 has a tier 2. Do you have visibility in that? Are you trusting and verifying and hoping that your tier 1s have real control and are providing the visibility and transparency to you? Because these multiple points of failure, the compounding effects of these risks, the complexity in our supply chains, it expands and creates a bigger problem statement as you get across the various tiers. And so monitoring in our traditionally reactive methodologies, as we evolve, are becoming less efficient and really insufficient to really get to that achievement of full supply chain risk management and hopefully resiliency, planned resiliency. The other piece that I like to talk about in that is, which many of you already probably know, is supply chains compete. So your supply chain, if you're company A, overlays with other industries. Your tier 4 might be someone else's tier 3, might be someone else's tier 2, might be actually company D. How your supply chain is outlined and key players in that, not trying to monitor tens of thousands, but the key relationships may be impacted deeper down in your supply chain in another tier. It might be impacted by another industry. I think about when I was in industrial manufacturing and aerospace. Nickel. Nickel is a key component in a lot of specialty alloys that we used. It's also a key component in the EV battery world for nickel ion batteries. Well, if I don't understand the different supply chains that nickel feeds into and what's happening in other supply chains that might impact my availability of materials or the pricing of my materials, or where there might be risk to be able to fulfill my demand. If I'm just really myopic and singular in my silo without looking broadly across, I might not see which risks and disruptions that I should be putting plans in place for and collaborating and partnering with my other organizations and design and those kinds of things. I might be leaving things outside of my control. And it really comes down to the power of information. We get often swept up in the typical tech landscape in our organizations. We've got ERPs and source to contract and contract lifecycle management, demand planning tools, and all kinds of things around the periphery. But then we also have good old fashioned human qualitative interaction through our quarterly business reviews with our suppliers, through conversations with our stakeholders, and even going so far as industry benchmarking. It's the mix of these combination of factors that we can gather not just information, but try to really get to that power of information. Why? Because traditional approaches often center on the collection of data. And I had a leader not long ago, actually earlier in my career, I said maybe it is really a long time ago. Give an example like this. Tell me what decision strategically we should make. Well, this is the way a lot of the data we're collecting up out of our procurement tools looks. It's color patches and numbers. But can you really make an informed decision from this? Even when we start to boil it down to monitoring specific elements, it's still like a radar screen. There are blips on the radar, and we can start to make some decisions potentially, but they may not be as informed and as meaningful as we would like. It's when we start to connect, and it sounds obvious, but when we start to connect those dots together, that we really start to get some insight and information that we can be really meaningful with. And so I like that to equate to the first iteration of you're building a puzzle. And as you get into your second iteration, that puzzle starts to come together and you begin to build a picture of a bear, in this case, a grizzly bear. Now I can start to make some really informed decisions of how I'm going to mitigate the risk of this potential threat and understand what a grizzly bear might be interested and see what's in my control to remove those threats. But it's an ongoing multiple iteration process, because as we go into additional iterations, what we may find is the risk is not what we perceived. I'm old enough to remember and love the Yogi Bear as a kid. Yogi Bear is a bear. There's risk associated with them. But in this case, where we put our campground and our picnic basket and so forth, is also an area frequented by beavers. The real risk and the highest priority risk might be the beaver, and then supplemented with other complementary things. That's information that we can then design a better outcome in the future through those continued iterations. And so that information and kind of information is what drives us to action. And this is part of that evolution to designing for resiliency. I like this definition of resilience. It's the ability of supply chains to recover quickly from unexpected events. This whole process I've been describing is about removing the unexpected. Collect your data for sure, compare risks, align to your corporate goals. You can evaluate multiple factors, identify combinations with highest impact, really document and get into those vulnerabilities, risks, and opportunities, and get to root cause. But then don't just monitor and have that business continuity planned. Take action. What's in your control? Make those design changes. That's the difference. So this new approach and evolving what you may be very comfortable with in your risk management perspective requires this kind of continual improvement methodology that many companies have used for a long time. The old Deming wheel, plan, do, check, act. So we plan, we do, we check, or we're measuring outcomes. Are we having the right results based on what our assumptions are? Do we act on what we've learned and start the planning cycle over again? That's about identifying what's in your control. That's about getting to a better design, selecting better partners, and really finding opportunity to not just hope and manage through those crises, but really have an impact and design a durable supply chain and performance. A big part of that today, given how ingrained our processes are and our people skills and the technology piece, is a change management perspective. So change is really important to drive that supply chain performance. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Geoff, to talk about change management.
Thanks, Caldwell. So Caldwell's mentioned the different technology stacks available to people, and we've talked a lot about supply chain systems and dashboards, but it's not about the technology itself. It's important, and I'll read this. This is breaking one of the cardinal sins of PowerPoint, but I'll read the quote because it's important. It's important to remember that technology transformation, be it ERP or any application modernization initiative, it's not really about the technology. It's about changing the way your business runs and changing how people do their work. And where change management comes in, it's up to every organization to determine whether they will simply let these changes happen and hope for the best, or focus on proactively managing them. And so the focus of what I'll present is on how do you proactively manage change? How do you go from monitoring to anticipating and forecasting? If you go to the next slide, please. So what is change management? Change management is the application of a structured process and set of tools for leading the people side of change to achieve a desired outcome. It's that simple, it's that straightforward. You're dealing with people, and so you're leading them towards a desired outcome. Leading practices in change include establishing clear governance, confirming executive sponsorship, but not just executive sponsorship, also considering engaging end users, operational managers, those people directly impacted by the change, communicating early, often, transparently that there is a change happening and what are the benefits, what are the pitfalls, what are the implications of the change, addressing resistance proactively. Resistance is not an if, it's a when. And so you need to understand what are the root causes of resistance. How do you best mitigate them? It could simply be that people don't have the right information in front of them and are making assumptions based on previous projects, previous change initiatives that may or may not have turned out successfully. Supporting employees through the change with proper training, with proper support in new systems, in new processes, in coaching, and then understanding the impact of these changes to stakeholders, knowing that moving from monitoring to anticipating and forecasting represents a large change in how people do their daily work and go about their daily functions. If we could go to the next slide. And so when you're managing a project, when you're doing a project, it's important to understand that it's a holistic approach that will win the day. It's not just about technology, but it's also about process change and it's about people change. And so the most successful programs we've seen over time, that I've experienced over time, is that you have a holistic approach. Think of it as a three-legged stool, people, process, and technology, and you need an equilibrium between them for stability. And so while we focus primarily on the top part here, on technical and product implementation, we've heard some horror stories. For example, the new system is our process without actually understanding what the process is. So over-indexing on platform implementation will surely lead to suboptimal results and maybe even failure. And change management is about the people and the process side, about engaging, adopting, using the new system, using the new processes, reaching the desired outcomes. It's this holistic approach that leads to success. Okay, if we could go to the next slide, it's a build, Caldwell. Thanks. So we have a three-phased approach to change management. And I'll go over a specific tool a little bit later that you can use in your own areas, in your own companies, to affect change, to plan for it. So the first is to prepare the approach, assessing your current state. What are the pain points? Why do we need to change? Why do we need to change now? What are the metrics? You need to spend a lot of time on understanding your current state. Einstein had a quote once that if he was given an hour to save the world, he'd spend 50 minutes on the problem and 10 minutes on the solution. And so really understanding your current state as a baseline is important. Defining success, defining a clear vision of what is the outcome you're seeking. What are the goals? What's the vision for this new process, this new way of working? How do you envision users using it? How do you envision metrics improving? So you're defining success. And then once you have that as is and to be view, you can start to understand what is the impact to stakeholders. How will they be impacted by a new process? How will they be impacted by a new system? What training do they need? What mitigation strategies, what communication strategies do you need to employ to make this as smooth as possible, because it's never completely smooth, but as smooth as possible process from going from your current state to your desired state. So understanding these three elements leads you to defining your change management strategy. What is the approach that you will take to deploy the change? If we can go to the next build, thank you. And so here is when we're doing the plan, do, check, and act. Plan and act. What will we do to prepare, equip, and support people in this change? What are the trainings that need to occur? What are the communications efforts that need to occur? We then deploy the strategy that we've created in the prepare approach phase. We initiate program strategy, we engage with stakeholders, we begin the implementation of the new system, we begin the process design and feedback sessions with stakeholders. We also do training and we do communications. And then probably as importantly as the first three is we adapt our actions. Yes, we do have a strategy. It's important to stick to a plan. Fully agreed, fully on board with that. But the famous Mike Tyson quote of everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth applies here. So you have to adapt your actions. You have to be resilient. Your plan, while it may carry out, will have some buffeting and you'll need to make adjustments. And so here's your change management plan. This is how you're going to affect the change. If we could go to the next build. And then the most important part, how do you sustain outcomes? Well, how do you know that you've achieved the current or the future state? What are the metrics? What are the tangible outcomes? A new system, a new process design, users trained and communicated with. How do you know that you've reached this new plateau, this new vision? How do you activate sustainment? What's needed to ensure that the change sticks? Sometimes people think, well, the change is the hard part, but no, the sustaining of the change is the hard part. That's where you change from a project mindset to an operational mindset. This is where you set in milestones, you celebrate small victories. You change the way the organization is running, and you're changing how you're managing the organization. So these are the three phases in change management. And then I have a tool, if we can go to the next slide, Caldwell, thank you. I have a tool that I use when I work with clients and when we do a workshop around the change that is about to occur. And this is something that you can take back to your organizations and that you can perform today in any sort of change that you're anticipating. So I've already talked a little bit about this, always good to reinforce. But when you're doing a scoping workshop, you're trying to understand the nature, the complexity, the time, the resources required. And so this is a tool that you can use to answer some of those questions. So what is the current state? Really spending time on developing your problem statement, making sure that you have consensus, that everyone is on board and solving the same problem. So what is the current state? This is where you're defining what you're doing today. What are the pain points? How do you need to change? Why do you need to change? Why do you need to change now? Then you describe the future state. What are the new processes? What are the new systems? What are the metrics that you are trying to achieve? What are the business outcomes that you're trying to achieve with this change? So you're describing that in as much detail as possible. And then what you're doing after that, after you've got the as is and the to be, you take a look at stakeholders. How are they impacted by the change? How are they going to need to work differently in the future? What training do they need? What do you need to communicate to them? And by which medium? Is it a town hall? Is it regular emails? Is it going to be a kickoff meeting? All sorts of different methods can apply here, but you need to understand the impact of the change so that you can communicate the benefits of the change. And this is the next section. Everybody, regardless of situation, will always think in terms of themselves. And so what's in it for me? What are the benefits to doing this change? How will this benefit me? And those need to be clearly communicated to stakeholders so that they have motivation for change. And then another important one is, will there be a behavior change? Will they need to relate to suppliers in a different way? Will they be going from a less formal and informal process of selection based on relationships to more of a metrics-based quantitative analysis of supplier relationships? That changes the dynamic, that changes the behavior. And so when you have these elements put together, you can do this on one slide. You can try to crisp up your message in one slide, but you can also do this more extensively if it behooves you or if it benefits you. But when you have these elements in place, you can develop your project plan in line with other plans. So you may have a systems implementation plan, but without the change management work stream, as I mentioned before, you may not get very far. And so what does all of this mean? So if we could go to the next slide. So with change management, what the goal is and what we see repeatedly, and this is coming from an organization called PROCE, which is a change management research organization. With change management, employees feel prepared, they feel equipped, they feel supported in the change. There's stakeholder engagement. The case for change is communicated. You're 7 times likelier to meet your project objectives, 7 times. You're 4.6 times likelier to stay on schedule, 1.4 times likelier to stay on budget, and any sort of return on investment that's dependent on people doing or using a new system or performing a new process, the people side of the ROI is achieved. And so these are important aspects to consider. Now, we've all lived through what happens without change management. Regardless of the quality and the sophistication of our enterprise, we have sometimes relied too much on IT to affect change for us. And so without change management, employees feel surprised and besieged by the change. They may not have been read in at the right time. They may be surprised that there's a new system that they have to train on, or that there's now a new process, a new metrics that they have to manage to. So you end up with stakeholder resistance, organizational inertia, low adoption and usage, failed project results, extended project timelines because you may have to restart the project on the right footing, additional project costs as well. These are all factors that can play when you don't properly consider change management in your project work streams. If we could go to the next slide, Caldwell. And so I want to leave you with both a positive view and not a warning view, but a view of what happens without the right change management. And so according to PROCE, in one of their research papers, and this is backed up, I've seen research from McKinsey, I've seen research from other organizations, about 70% of change initiatives fail or need to be restarted. And failure is, as I mentioned in the previous slides, failure is something that you can't completely avoid, but that you can mitigate. and that you can plan for and that you can work around if you plan in the right way. But failure comes from several sources. Failure to make a compelling case. Why are users changing? What is the benefit for them? What is happening to their process, to their system, and why is that a good thing? Failure to celebrate small wins and milestones. There's a difference between compliance and commitment. Yes, you may have people that are on the surface maybe agreeing with you, but are they really committed to the change? Have they bought in? And so failing to celebrate small wins and milestones, you don't build momentum without it. Ignoring organizational culture is an important one as well. This is where, as just a generic example, you may have been in a top-down hierarchical organization, or you may have been in a more decentralized organization where decision making is really pushed to the front line. Those are two extremes. But what type of culture are you operating in, and how does that impact the change and the planning for the change that you will have? Mentioned also before, not dealing proactively with resistance. That you will encounter resistance. Understanding the root cause and the mitigations for that ahead of time helps you to plan and to work around that resistance and to overcome it. And then perhaps the two most important ones to me is not involving employees. So they have a not in my backyard kind of attitude, but not involving employees enough in the change, enough in the future state designs. And then losing focus. Every new project becomes the focus. And so you can't lose focus on a project. You have to follow it through to the sustainment phase. And so if you plan around these failure points, if you set the right current state, if you define and design the right future state and understand the impact to stakeholders, many of these failure points are mitigated. All right, if we can go, this is, I think you're taking back over.
Yeah. Thanks, Geoff.
Yes.
So bringing it back full circle to risk management, and I could even expand that to any kind of, process change within the procurement function. We need to change our approach because I believe resilience is a choice. It's not by chance. Hope's not a plan. You actually have the ability to identify and remove the unexpected. We have enough information, enough historical information, and if our process we engage the right stakeholders, enough forward-looking information to really change our outcomes by designing a better future. So shift the risk process from monitoring to that design. I think of monitoring sometimes as the smoke detector at home. We've got a tool that tells us when there might be a fire, but how often do we now just take the battery out, dismantle it? Do we really use the information at our fingertips to maybe figure out why it keeps going off? Maybe no one's trained on how to use the stove and the kitchen's burning. Maybe it's old electrical systems, various things. But most of us in our households, at least if it's my household, I take the battery out or dismantle the smoke detector. There's a complacency there. I think that my theory is that's where some of these traditional risk management processes and tools have gotten to. We've gotten used to them, and there's so much going on, so much risk and disruption on a daily basis. We're somewhat resistant to getting those messages and really leveraging the information that's available. Don't focus solely on the data and the technology, as we've been saying. I have a tool, we're monitoring it, we loaded watch lists. That's great. But just because you have that doesn't mean you're going to be resilient. You might be better at crisis management. You might be able to react a bit faster, but that's not the same thing as designing a performance-driven supply chain that is durable and resilient. So it's not just about getting better at crisis management. It's really about changing behaviors, as we've talked about, changing process, challenging the status quo. That's why the second tenet here, it is about change management. Those of us who have been in these leadership roles, who have gone and sold the business case for a new source to contract platform, or end-to-end, or purchase to pay, or e-invoicing or risk management and supplier lifecycle kind of tools, those ROIs, we think it's a technology implementation. It's often not. It's about the people and their skills and how they're doing their work, the processes they're following, and where we use the tool to provide information, not just workflow, but information that makes us smarter, more strategic, and really be able to evolve and adapt. And lastly, why? Because that's about controlling your future, not being controlled by the future, but controlling the outcomes in the future. I think those elements are the formula for breaking what has been a really good cycle of crisis management. I don't know about your organizations. I worked in some hero worship organizations where we really had to fundamentally change how we approach these things, even pre-COVID, going back to the Great Recession, because we got really good at dropping in task teams, tiger teams, whatever you want to call them, to manage the latest crisis. And we figured that can be expensive. It churns through morale. It wears people out. And for 20 years, it's not if and which risk and which disruption, it's when and which combination. So if we know that, then let's control the future and really design something better and drive performance long term. And so with that, we thank you for your time today. We do have time for questions and answers, Q&A. If anyone has questions, Geoff and I are happy to field anything, but we wish you the best, and we hope you learned just a few things and got your minds working today on this topic.
And I think, Caldwell, just to add to that, I think we'll make the slides available. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think, Kathy, that's true.
Yes. Okay.
Yep. Okay, great. That would be great, because that was actually a question that came in to me as
Sure.
well during the presentation. Can we have the slides?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Okay. So they will send the slides over to me after we get off, and then I will make sure that everybody gets a copy of the slides with the recording, which I'll be posting to the YouTube channel today.
Okay. And then if there are any follow-up questions, don't hesitate to DM me or Caldwell on LinkedIn. I think you've got the link in the chat.
Yes, I made sure I put in your LinkedIn profile. So please connect with our speakers, connect with Caldwell and Geoff. And if you have any questions, you can always then direct message them, and they'll get back to you.
And a shameless plug, as a CPSM, I will be at ISM World in Orlando this year. So if you'd like to come to the Avetta booth and say hello and follow up and ask any follow-up questions, I would certainly make myself available there.
Yeah, definitely. I was going to mention that.
I got ahead of you.
You did. Well, thank you very much. Well, thank you everybody for joining us, and thank you, Caldwell and Geoff. I appreciate it.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Okay, everybody have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye.